Hey everyone, you're watching We Had That, and today I'm going to talk about the 1979 Killer Kane action figure from the Buck Rogers in the 25th Century line by Mego. The Buck Rogers character Killer Kane had been around for decades when the 1979 Universal Buck Rogers in the 25th Century movie came out. Although a lot of science fiction movies released around this time flopped, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century did very well. With a budget of about $3.5 million, it grossed over $21 million in sales in North America alone. The huge success of the movie led to NBC turning Buck Rogers into a weekly series, which began on September 20th, 1979. I'm confident that the movie itself, like many other movies at the time, was made because of the success of Star Wars. But Star Wars also had a huge influence on the toy industry of the time. The success of Kenner's Star Wars figures led to toys being made for many movies that otherwise would probably have never had toys. The Mego Toy Company in particular released numerous toys for many properties looking for the next big thing. We know that Mego acquired the license to manufacture the toys for Buck Rogers, but I've read conflicting information about the circumstances surrounding the acquisition of that license. I've read that Mego picked up the license as a favor and didn't really have high expectations for the toy line, but I've also heard that Mego was willing to gamble on this line because Buck Rogers was a space-themed property with an existing track record that was proposed shortly after the monumentous success of Star Wars. Maybe both are true. I've also heard that the figures sold very well for Mego, and I've heard that they sold poorly. I guess it's possible that some characters sold well, while others didn't. Either way, kids who played with the figures were the real winners. Plus, the fact that 9 figures were produced for the first and only wave was very cool. Many toy lines only got 4 or 5 figures, so it was great that we got so many Buck Rogers figures, plus vehicles and even a playset. Each of the Buck Rogers figures came packaged on the same card with only the figure's name at the bottom left being different. The card backs all showed the 9 figures available in the line. Mego even advertised these figures on television with a commercial. You can see how different the Killer Kane figure was that sold in stores from the one in the commercial here. Mego had also made a 12-inch Killer Kane, which I briefly owned as an adult, who had a completely different look from the 3 3/4 inch figure. I had most of the 3 3/4 inch figures in the line as a kid. Tiger Man didn't survive, and he was one of my favorites. But these 6 figures are what remain of my childhood Buck Rogers collection. Twiki, Wilma Deering, Buck Rogers, a Draconian Guard, Killer Kane, and Draco. Each figure played a bit of a different role in my childhood adventures, but today I'm mainly talking about Killer Kane. Buck Rogers was created by Philip Francis Nowland almost 100 years ago, way back in 1928. In the story Armageddon 2419 AD, which was published in the August 1928 issue of a pulp magazine called Amazing Stories. Buck's adventures were adapted into a syndicated comic strip starting the next year in 1929, and this is where Kane first appeared. Buck Rogers was such a popular comic strip that it inspired many other stories about space heroes, the most famous of which was probably Flash Gordon, whose comic strip debuted in 1934. In 1932, Buck's adventures were brought into homes across America in the form of a radio program. In 1939, Universal Pictures got the rights to produce a 12-chapter film serial starring Buster Crabbe. The version of Kane from the Buck Rogers movie, played by Henry Silva, and the TV show, played by Michael Ansara, had a lower rank than he did in previous versions. In this version, the main bad guy, who never actually came in contact with Buck Rogers, was Emperor Draco. Kane was the commander of Draco's Draconian army and seemed to be the brains of the operation, despite having to submit somewhat to the wishes of Emperor Draco's daughter, Princess Ardala. In previous incarnations of Buck Rogers, Ardala had been the girlfriend of Kane. When the Buck Rogers line of figures was released, I thought they were neat. Star Wars figures were easily my favorite at the time, but the Buck Rogers figures had more articulation than Star Wars figures, so you could pose them a lot better. Even though Killer Kane wasn't my favorite Buck Rogers figure, that honor belonged to Tiger Man, Kane ended up seeing a lot of action over the years. I threw my Buck Rogers figures in with other toy lines like Star Wars and G.I. Joe more than I played with them as Buck Rogers figures. Typically, they had the same names, but were completely different characters in each of their toy adventures. When G.I. Joe first came out, there weren't a lot of bad guys, so Killer Kane was sometimes the leader of my Cobra Troopers. Ninjas were everywhere throughout the 80s, video games, movies, toys, you name it. But in the early 80s, they hadn't quite risen to popularity yet. However, martial arts in general were popular among my friends thanks to the Bruce Lee movies that aired on TV over the weekends. As a kid, I thought my Killer Kane action figure had a face that looked like Bruce Lee. I can only barely see it now. And his clothes looked kind of like the clothes I'd seen guys wearing in Bruce Lee movies. With a name like Killer Kane, he became my karate guy. At the time, all martial arts were just karate to me. When my Killer Kane action figure's thumb broke off, I decided it was because another guy had bit it off in a fight, but Killer Kane still beat him. When I got a Cobra Commander figure, Killer Kane was no longer in charge, but he was still Cobra's karate guy, until an even cooler official karate guy showed up. Even though I was more of a fan of Star Wars than Buck Rogers, and by the time G.I. Joe came out, I was more into military themes, I thought this line of figures was well worth having around. They mixed in well with whatever adventures were going on, especially with the first wave of G.I. Joe. Overall, my Buck Rogers figures went on to have many adventures, and I was glad to have the extra characters, particularly a karate guy like Killer Kane. Did you have any of the Buck Rogers action figures as a kid? Do you collect them now? Which character was your favorite? Tell me in the comments. Also, please give this video a like and share it on social media. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel and hit that notifications bell so that you'll be notified when I post new videos. And one last thing, if you're a fan of toys, you should know about ToyLanta, the biggest toy show in the southeastern United States, held annually just north of Atlanta, Georgia. Visit ToyLanta.com for more information. As always, thanks for watching.